Let's start again with Lyle. So this is right before you were kicked out.
Right, within a month or two
Probably
before.
a defining moment for you.
Well, no, not really.
No,
It wasn't. It wasn't. No, I already. I already felt that it had become, very. You gotta love those trucks.
Gotta love them.
Anyway, no, it wasn't really a defining moment for me. But it was one of those moments when you say, this is what I've thought, this is how I felt. I can't believe you're actually saying this, though.
What did he say?
Well, I've got it written down, although this is just paraphrasing.
The gist of it.
He said, you're not. He says, you people are not to have an identity of your own. It's not only how you dress, where you live, how you live, the outward appearances, but even your thoughts. You're not supposed to think thoughts or questions or anything like that. Anything that doesn't come from those over you in priesthood. And what that does, if you buy into that, you believe that, it gives total control of yourself over to the priesthood. And that puts all the people in a position, if the priesthood is run justly and correctly, that's fine. But it puts the people in a position of potentially being exploited or abused.
What does that do to? What do you think that does to people? I mean, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. It doesn't seem like anybody quite gets what's happening to him. Do you?
Well, I really don't know what's in the minds of other people. I really don't. But if you're of the mind frame that the church, the FLDS church, the priesthood's more important than the church. That is your only ticket to salvation, no matter what they do, because they're your only way to be saved. The prophet's your only connection with God. God and the prophet always do right. You'll pretty much follow along with anything you're told. Even though it may seem a little odd, a little bit strange, you'll say, well, that's what God must want, that's what I'll do. Okay, it's a test, whatever you want to call it, and I'll go along with that. And so you set aside, and that's what we were taught, set aside your own selfish will. Set aside your selfish will. We're taught that constantly. You're supposed to set that aside and follow, be led as if by a hair. A hair's not very thick, it's not much. Don't give any resistance, just come along. 100% obedience. And, for years I've said, well, why is obedience such an important point within the religion?
And it is important, isn't it?
Well, they said obedience is the first law of heaven. I said, no, it's not. That's not what is written.
What do you think the first law
Well,
of heaven
the first
is?
law of heaven, my understanding, is love the Lord thy God. It doesn't say be 100% obedient to God, it says to love Him. Now, love, I would say, they twisted that around to where they said, to love is to obey. It brings it right back to obedience. And I said, well, hey, obedience itself has no saving virtue. It really doesn't. You can be obedient to anything. So it's what you're obedient to, which brings it back to God.
Why did you feel it was so important to go on those blogs and start questioning?
Well, the reason I think that was important to me is I had no other avenue of expression. And in so many ways, I had feelings within me, but to write it out and to look at it, it helped to consolidate what I was thinking, put it into words, be able to look at it, analyze it, say, okay, yeah, now I see better. And so a lot of times I would write out pages of my thoughts and feelings. In a way, it was almost like a journal. Quite often, a lot of it never went online, never was sent in an email, but I'd write things out, and it just helped me make sense of what was happening within my life. I mean, I was basically awakening to a different viewpoint of life, one where I said, within the FLDS religion, your identity is given to you. Who you are as a person, your values are given to you. And everybody who's human has values. Now, where those values come from, they come from all kinds of places. They come from your culture, they come from your family, friends and neighbors, they can come from media, all different areas they come in. Some of them are values that you've challenged, looked at, and said, this is a good value, it's worthy of hanging on to. Other values are just there. You really don't think about them. They're fairly innate. I mean, we've all had the experience of going into a store and buying something we don't really need or want, but the value has been put in there. The emotional desire for that has been put in there through advertising. I mean, they've got that down to a science to create desires within individuals. So the values that we run our lives by come from somewhere. And we've got, I feel it's our greatest gift from God, the ability to challenge those values and say, is this a good value? Why is this good? Why do I want this within me? Why should I live my life this way or that way? How do I know this action's a good action or not? And so, you know, as I come to that realization, I said, well, if God's a God that likes to be inquired of, why is the current religion I'm in saying don't ask questions, don't ask what's going on? I said, you know, it's not, something from here to here changed. What changed?
From
Why?
the time Warren got in?
No, from the days of Joseph Smith. From what Joseph Smith said to what we're being taught now. Now, if you go back all the way through history, even clear back to Joseph Smith, it's a revisionist history. It really is in so many ways. But there's a lot of basic truths that whether you agree with the life of Joseph Smith or not, as a student of human nature, he was on a lot of stuff. He was a very intelligent man, and so, you know, he said a lot of good things. Hold off for a minute.
I guess what I'm trying to get across is it seems like since the Jeffs took over, it was kind of a slow decline. Maybe not so much Rulon as Warren, as far as whether
No,
people.
I'm sorry. I must have.
Oh, was it actually mine?
It's yours now. It just turned off and then turning it back on. It takes a few seconds.
Okay. It just seems like things got kind of unbearable.
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, ask that question again. It's, I think it's just an entire paradigm of how the Jeffs viewed the religion as opposed to how the former prophet Leroy Johnson viewed it. So, yeah, I'll try to explain that.
Okay. Are you happy with how you've been explaining the people and why they do what they do so far? Because that's kind of what you wanted to get across. I mean, look, the outside world, obviously, now that, you know, the raid happened and you see the women in the long dresses and the kids with the long hair and all this stuff, they're different.
Right.
So, what would you want to tell people on the outside about the FLDS? You know, if people say, oh yeah, they have certain stereotypes of the FLDS. Why do they do the things they do? Why is it when you drive into Short Creek you feel like you've gone back 100 years? You know, why do people follow this prophet who doesn't let them question? What in the world's going on there? Is it really just a strange town full of a freak show?
Well,
You know, what is going on there? Try to explain to us why they're so different and what they believe in.
well, I think belief's an individual thing, but yes, from an outside perspective, you'd say this is very strange. It's very different. Now, of course, there's cultures who live within America that aren't like mainstream America, and that's fine. There's no problem with being part of a culture that's different. And I don't hold that against anyone to be a culture that's different than the main. But the difference is, within the FLDS, I feel, one of the biggest differences is the fact that who they are, what guides their lives, they've given that over to the organization of the priesthood, which is run really by one man or several men who are accountable to God only, which really means they're not accountable to anyone. It creates the potential for the people to be exploited, to be abused, and or if anyone within the leadership has indiscretions, does things wrong, they're going to use their positions of power to try to cover that up.
And do you think that's what's going on with Warren Jeffs right now?
I'm afraid that's what's happened with Warren Jeffs. Personally, I don't think he started out really to abuse the power. I've got to give him the benefit of a doubt. I think he started out the one man at the top. That's what we've been taught for a lot of years, trying to make sure that the people are saved. But he found out very quickly, when you've got unlimited power, you're not accountable to anyone. You know, there's a lot of perks that come along with that. And Maybe he had desires to have young brides. Okay, so he did.
That's a perk.
That is a perk. As long as he, as long as he was marrying them to other women and trying to justify it as protecting the girls, then he can marry them himself too.
To other men, you mean?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, as long as he was marrying them to other men.
Right, right. As long as he would marry, some of the young girls to other men.
Then the other men got the perks.
Right, and it's a common misconception, I think, with a lot of people that say it's just a group of pedophiles out there. I really don't think it is. It's a lot of very hardworking men and families. I would say their biggest fault is they're too trusting. They trust anything and everything they're told by the leadership.
And I think you have to say, there are thousands of people like the ones you just explained, right? Then you got a handful at the top.
That's very true. There's very few at the very top who run and control and make all the decisions for everybody underneath them. And the difficult thing for everyone that's below the ones at the top is that they are totally dependent upon the leadership for their sense of who they are and well-being.
I know these interruptions are not the best, so sorry.
Well, it's okay. I mean, this park is beautiful. It's a trade-off, and I didn't want to do this in Short Creek.
Well, nobody's going to know the difference of where it is.
Yeah, I didn't want for us to be stressed out by people following us.
It's an
And I didn't
interesting
know
backdrop here.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So it's not just a bunch of child molesters.
No, no. And I don't think that the men, when they marry the young girls, it's not that they go in and say, hey, I need another young bride or a couple of young brides. I dare say most of the men would be just as content, and maybe more content, to have someone who's a little bit older, who's legally of age, where they don't really have to worry about hiding them or worrying about the law or anything like that. But if they don't take the bride, if they refuse it, that's turning away a blessing. That's something you just don't do, because, well, this is what God wants. How come you're not doing what God's asked you to do? It's not only bad if the girl refuses, and she really doesn't have much power, but if the man says, I can't go along with this, I don't feel right about it, or the father of the young girl says, no, I don't want this young girl to be married. I don't want my child to be married this young. I'm not going to allow this to happen. Hey, you're going against God because you're going against what the prophet asked, who speaks for God. And so it puts them in the position of, well, if you resist, if you say no, most likely they'd say, well, hey, you've lost your priesthood. Go away. Leave your family. So you're stuck in a position as each elder with their family of saying, well, do I just go along with this, or do I risk the consequences of having my family taken away from me? And where the religion is your identity, it is your connection to God. It's your only connection with God. That's a very serious consequence.
Were you told, though, growing up, that the more wives you have, the more chance you have of being saved and bringing those wives along with you? I mean, what's that all about?
No, I wasn't taught that at all when I was growing up. We were taught that plural marriage is one of the higher laws of God. So a man is required to live plural marriage. And I really never heard, the first place I heard it was through news media, that you have to have 3 wives or whatever to be considered, saved or worthy, and the more you've got, the more righteous you are. I never found any numbers on any of that. I never heard any numbers. Growing up, I just understood, well, that's the way God has his family arranged, is that it's one man in charge of several women.
But Warren's got as much as 100 wives.
He does.
80 to 100. You don't, why?
Well, that's a good question. That's one of those things I said, why? Why does he need that many? Well, okay, he's God's prophet, but why does he need that many wives? I don't know.
Why would you want that many wives?
Well,
I mean, it just seems.
It's hard to say.
Don't you think it was part of the whole part of him kind of running with stuff, running with the power?
Well, very possibly. It's very possibly. The thing is that, say, myself, anyone put into that same position where you have no checks and balances, you're accountable only to God, so you're not accountable to anyone on this earth. who do we know God is? God to one person may be the devil to another. So you've got an individual who has no oversight, a lot of control and power over the people. They'll do just about anything he says because it's coming from God. It sets the stage to where I don't think even the best person with the best of intentions really knows what they'll end up doing, because they can do an action and get away with it. Nobody really questions it. Oh, okay, that must be what God wants. And I look back in history, Abraham Lincoln, back during the Civil War, his wife was asking him, she says, well, why don't you ever criticize the generals in the South? Why don't you criticize those people? Because he never would. And Abraham Lincoln said, well, you know what? If you had gone through the very experiences they've gone through, very likely you'd do the very same things they'd be doing. And when I read that, I says, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know what I would be doing if I were to be placed in that position. I don't think anybody knows. But that is the very root of the problem, is putting someone in a position where there is zero oversight. That really is, I think, the issue with what has happened.
Especially when he's supposedly getting his messages from God.
Right.
He's in charge of salvation.
Right. It's coming from God. It's your only ticket to salvation. He has, as far as how he runs the entire organization, how he tells people to do what they're doing, running the families, he can say and do anything, and the people are pretty much forced to go along with it.
Well, what's salvation, though, Arnold? I mean, what about all these stories we hear about how the end times are coming and it's the FLDS who will make it through because they're the pure?
Well,
is that really true? Does that happen where people really think the world's going to end?
They do. They do believe that. But as far as going back to your question, what is salvation? We believe as FLDS that your salvation is you're a spirit before you come to this. You're one of God's children as a spirit child. You've got to come to earth and have a physical body. And at that point, once you've had a physical body, live faithful and die, you can take that in the resurrection, you have a physical body and you become a God.
Something's going on. Maybe it's the fires. I think it's the fires in the mountain.
It might be.
So what about all this talk about the end of the world? It seems like Warren's been saying that a lot, that the end of the world's coming.
Well,
do you believe the end of the world's coming, or
no.
Were you ever in the meetings when that was brought up?
Oh yeah, I was in the meetings.
What do they say?
Well, lucky you.
Yeah, lucky me. What do they say in the meetings when they tell everyone that the end of the world's coming?
As far as those prophecies and different things? Well, it's considered, and a lot of times, especially when Warren moved to Texas, had very open access to a phone. He called directly into the meetings.
Were you there?
I was there. And he would speak to the people and give his revelations of what's about to happen, what's coming, the destructions. One of the last ones that I was at, he had the revelation that he spoke to the people that a very large body, he calls it, a heavenly body, which basically means another planet or meteor, was about to crash into the earth. And this would cause a huge tidal wave, which would wipe out certain cities and areas, cause large earthquakes, which would kill and devastate other people. Because of the devastation, people would go very animalistic in nature, and I think the word he used was ravish each other, which was an interesting choice of words. But it was very graphic, and to be honest with you, it scared the hell out of the children that were at those meetings. My 10-year-old girl, we'd leave there and she couldn't believe what she'd heard, and she said, well, Father, what's going on? And how do you explain this? What do you really say to a child? But it's this fear that if you're not ready, if you're not prepared, you're going to be killed with the wicked. So you better prepare. So it's a little bit of a mind game there. But more than that, I think that Warren being in jail, that's given him much more power than he ever had when he was out of jail. It's very interesting because they've twisted that around to where the reason Warren is in jail is because the people aren't faithful enough for his presence. And so as long as you're not faithful enough, he's going to remain in prison. So
well,
the children,
a real good chance he's going to get life in prison.
Oh, very good chance of it. Well, maybe the people weren't faithful enough then. But so they can continually ask for higher and higher levels of devotion and turning over who you are as a person, your freedom to make choices, turn that over to the church as a sign of submission and obedience to God as your faithfulness to bring him back out of prison. And, you know, people constantly told, well, he is going to be delivered soon, but you're not faithful enough yet for his deliverance. Do this, this, and this. If that pleases the Lord, maybe he'll be delivered. Okay, they do everything. You didn't do it faithful. You weren't faithful enough. And so the children, you know, they're running around thinking, well, it's because of my little sins that our prophet's still in jail. He's in jail because of my indiscretions or anything that I may have done which may not be 100% correct. And so it creates a very powerful controlling effect upon the people. If he were out of prison, he wouldn't have that ability. And so as far as in the meetings when he called in, when he was giving those revelations, the end of the world, you know, what his entire plan was, I'm not sure. We're told this is the end of the end. This is the last days, final chance to prepare. The time is very short. But the time is very short. I've heard that ever since I was little. You know, the time is very short.
But you never know when the world's going to end. Then you're always looking over your shoulder.
You really
and wondering.
don't. You really don't. And you know, that was one other thing that was interesting to me, but I pretty much ignored it back in the year 2000. That's supposed to be the millennium. Y2K came, nothing really happened, which, okay, thankfully the people were faithful enough. The Lord gave us a little more time. But I remember Roland Jeff, so February, March of 2000, he spoke in meeting, he says, oh, the millennium is here. Sorry, I forgot to tell you. I thought, you know, that's interesting, the millennium. What we've told the millennium is this reign of peace and prosperity and everybody gets along and nothing really changed. How is it here? Well then, okay, now all the sermons changed for a little bit to here's how we've got to live to make sure the millennium happens. So, it was little things at first, but it still goes back. I think the major point where I said, whoa, something's really off is when he died. And at that point, I just had to say, what is it I truly believe in? Why do I believe this? And that's when I started searching in myself, what values do I have and where did they come from and why do I believe this is right or this is wrong? Why should I take this action or not take this action? And I looked at that back to the persecution of the people. Why do we feel like we're persecuted? Well, we're persecuted because largely underage marriages. That's really the driving force of a lot of it. It really is.
It's not the polygamy so much as it is.
No, not really. I don't think it is. You know, a lot of people have a problem with polygamy. Polygamy's got its pluses and minuses. I don't live polygamy. I don't think I ever will. It's not for everyone. Between consenting adults, that's their business. As long as the man has the ability to support both wives or 3 wives or 5 wives and all the children, okay, that's fine. That's between them. Let them go do it. Don't ask me to help pay for it. And I think that's where a lot of people get upset is they feel like that their tax dollars are being used to help subsidize this. That offends a lot of people, and understandably so. But really, I think the driving force of what is perceived as persecution among the FLDS goes back directly to underage marriages. Really
Which happened when?
They really haven't happened a lot. I mean, in the early days, way back, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, yes, occasionally there was a young marriage.
But can't you see why the rest of the world thinks that that's
absolutely.
inappropriate?
But it really didn't start back up until Warren took control. Because when Roland, his father, was alive, not too long before he died, laws were enacted in Utah, very strict laws about underage marriages. Well, as a church, we felt like those laws directly targeted us. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But underage marriage, no matter who it's to, that's wrong. It shouldn't happen. But he got up and he says, okay, we're going to obey the laws. There's no reason to not obey this law. He felt like it had been enacted against us, but he was of the opinion, I think wisely so, okay, live according to the laws. Which, according to the Doctrine and Covenants, the canon of Mormon scripture, which was revelation directly from God to Joseph Smith, is how it's believed. Joseph Smith said, any man who is living the laws of God has no need to break the laws of the land. So I found that very interesting that we're going around saying, well, we can't agree with these laws. We've got to live God's laws, which means if we live God's laws, we break the laws of the land. By living God's laws, meaning marrying young girls, because that's what the prophet asked. That must be what God wants. But that goes against what the Doctrine and Covenants said. How do you balance that? I couldn't balance that. That was one of my questions. I said, this doesn't make sense. Why are we running around claiming to do the will of God? God said that as long as we're living His laws, we don't have to break the laws of the land. We're breaking the laws of the land. So are we living God's law? Which one is wrong? Which one is right? I couldn't justify it. I couldn't find a justifiable answer in my mind. And so it was that, and the fact that I said, we're under basically under a microscope as a community, as a religious group. Not just because we're different, but because we're taking children and allowing these children to literally become enslaved through marriage. I mean, that's a very strong word, but think about it. A 15, 16, 17-year-old girl, as soon as she has a child, what's the natural instinct of a mother? She wants to protect that child, right? So she'll do everything she can, which usually means staying with that man, even though she doesn't love that man necessarily. Well, they're told, well, even if you don't at first, you'll grow to love him. Maybe some do, some don't, I don't know. But to me, that's a bit of entrapment. And was she any more pure at 14, 15, 16, 17 than she would be at 21, 22, 23? I couldn't find anywhere that it was ever written that said that they had to be at a certain age to be married and that they were better at a certain age than other ages. Mm-hmm. That didn't make sense to me.
So that was the final question. I'm thinking.
Well, that was one of the ultimate questions, is why can't this religion... I was looking back at my values. Okay, one of my values says, do what the prophet says no matter what. That was a value I'd been given from the religion. It's coming from God. But I had to stop myself when I started questioning who I was, why I did everything, and said, well, okay, but that doesn't square up with what I've been told God said and is written down in our scriptures. Why not? Is this a value that's correct or not correct? I couldn't go to the prophet and say, hey, what's going on here? Other men had done similar at times, and they had been reprimanded publicly by the prophet for questioning what the prophet's doing. God and the prophet always do right. You just don't question that. And so that really started me down the road of, well, how do I know if something's right or wrong? Obviously, what my prophet's telling me isn't squaring up with reality, because if it squared up with reality, why would we be breaking laws and then feeling persecuted? I mean, that's a seed we've sown. Naturally, you do an action, there's going to be a consequence to the action. Why do we plant the seed of an action and then feel sorry for ourselves, feel that we're persecuted for the very result of what we just sown? It didn't make sense. It just doesn't square up with reality.
So after a while, it sounds to me like you finally decided to make a very tough decision.
Well, of course it's a tough decision, because you grow up in it. It's your whole life. And a lot of times you say, well, why can't people see what's happening? Why don't they have the perspective, say, that you have, or that anyone else looking in has of the group? When you're within a sheltered community, a sheltered group, mm-hmm. You've got a very limited perspective of the world, and intentionally so.
Tell me what happened. They told you to leave.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and you did what?
Well, they put me on probation. Several weeks after that, my father-in-law shows up and tries to convince my wife to leave me. Mm-hmm. This is before I'm told anything about leaving my family. Well, I think it was a week, maybe a week and a half after that, I was in Vegas again. It was 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. I get a call from my father, who I don't get a lot of calls from. He's been gone on priesthood projects, building whatever he's doing. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure he was down in Texas, but mm-hmm. I don't have any way to prove that. But he calls me up and he says, "Are you in town?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm in Las Vegas." He says, "Well, I need to talk to you as soon as you get in town. Will you please call me?" I said, "Sure. I won't be in town until this afternoon." Well, I knew pretty well why he wanted to see me. Why else would he suddenly show up in town where he's gone for months and request just to see me and talk to me, something very important? And so, you know, I drove home. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. This is in January, beginning of February, right around that time of this year. And I called him up and says, I'm in town now. Where would you like to talk? He says, well, just come over to the house and talk to me. And I went over to the house, and he's got a cabinet shop off to the side of his house. And he said, let's just go out here where it's private. And we walked in, he shut and locked the door, and he says, well, he says, this is very difficult for me, which I'm sure it was. I have no doubt of that. For a father to have to tell his son, walk away from your family, your community, and leave. But he says, you know, this is very difficult for me, but I've been asked to deliver a message to you. He said, you've been, the words he used, you've been weighed in the balance. Basically, you've been judged and found to not hold priesthood. And you are to leave your wife and family and to be out of the community before sundown. Do you accept this message? And I said, well, no, I don't. I don't accept this message, which I think was a bit of a shocker to him. That's not a common response. And I said, you know, Father, I've done nothing against my family. Every covenant I've made with my wife, I've never broken. I've never abused my children. I've done my best to be a good father to them. I said, the responsibility of being a father, I said, that's the greatest responsibility I can think of in this life. And to have a positive impact and influence on your children. I said, I take that very seriously. That's the greatest responsibility I can possibly think of, the greatest stewardship that I could ever have. I said, you know, for a man to just walk away from his family, I said, I view that as a major lack of integrity. I said, no, I'm not going to. And of course, you know, he had to deliver the message to me. He had to report back to Lyle, who's the one he reports to, and Lyle is supposed to report to Warren whether he does or not. I don't know. I don't even know if that came from Warren or not. It may have, it may not have. I don't know.
So you've said no, and you've decided to live within the community.
Absolutely. And I told him, I said, not only am I not leaving my family, he says, well, do you plan to stay in the community? I says, yes, I do.
Is that bad?
That is.
Why
You're
is
living,
that bad?
well, it's considered priesthood land. It's part of the church. If you're not a faithful member, you shouldn't be there. You know, you're an evil influence now on those around you. They don't want those who are termed apostate to be near and be able to influence anyone within the community. They want them to go away so they can help isolate the rest of the community from
And
them.
most of the time people do, don't they?
Most of the men that I know of, when they're given that ultimatum, leave your family, they leave. And you'll say, well, you know, why would a man do that? Why would any man leave his family? But if you've got that value within you, it's not a personal value, but it's been given by the church, but you've bought into it, you don't challenge it at all, that whatever the prophet tells you is of God, and that my family's only chance of salvation is if they have priesthood in their life. The only way to have priesthood is through the husband. If the husband doesn't have it, they've got to be connected to a priesthood holder within the church. The man will say, well, you know what? For my children's sake, I will leave. That's a belief they've got. It's a value. It's a very strong value. I will walk away from my family, willingly so, to make sure that they have a chance at salvation.
What was different about you then?
What was different about me? I didn't buy into that. I didn't believe that the salvation of my family was dependent on my loyalty to another man.
Do you believe that's true?
That you have to be loyal? Or,
Was that a good decision?
Oh, absolutely, it's a good decision. But that's something that's pushed very heavily within the church organization, within that priesthood, is that if you, I don't know if you've ever seen it within the houses, they've got pictures of all the prophets, starting at Joseph Smith up to Warren Jeffs in a picture frame. Underneath that it says, loyalty is life, or loyalty to priesthood is life. And, you know, those came out 3 or 4 years ago. I said, you know, that's a terrible thing to be putting up. And you know, I didn't express that openly to very many people, because they'd say, well, what's wrong with you? But I said, you know, that's not a good saying to have. I said, because look what happens. If you put your loyalty in front of your integrity, I said, you'll end up with neither one of them.
Well, when I went into your house, I didn't know what to think because I saw the pictures of Warren Jeffs and Rulon up, and so but I don't know enough about people's houses to know, and so I didn't want to judge you.
I really haven't changed much within the house. I haven't changed much in how I look, how I dress. I guess there's a certain, as far as a physical appearance, that, you know, it's what I'm used to.
But
I don't judge people for how they dress. As far as the pictures on the wall,
yeah. Well,
it doesn't make a big difference to me one way or the other. I've got those pictures, they're there. You know, if I find something else that I like, I'll take it down.
Is this a process then for you, do you think?
I don't know if it's as much a process. It might just be that I just haven't done it. I've been so involved with other things. You know, there's not a lot of vindictive hate or anything. You know, some people, once they remove themselves from the religion, they begin to blame either the religion or individuals within the religion, say Warren, for all their problems. It's not Warren. Warren didn't create this mess. As much as anyone would like to say Warren created all this, he didn't. He just happened to be in a position where he could orchestrate a lot of things. I don't agree with a lot of his actions. Would I have done the same actions in the same position? I don't know. The actions are wrong. There's a lot of things he's done that I don't agree with at all. But do I hate him? Do I think he's a horrible, you know, individual? No, not really. I don't agree with the actions. I feel sorry for him. I wish that he wouldn't have done the things he's done. I feel badly that he's where he is now. He got himself where he's at, though. He is where he is because of his own actions. He sowed the seeds. But as far as, say, his picture's still up on the wall, it's really not an issue one way or the other to me. No, I don't worship him as anything other than a man. His picture's just there. I just haven't gotten around to taking it down. And I think in some ways, it does have to be a slow process for the family. The culture, the environment, what they're in. If you change it too dramatically, too quickly, it's difficult for them. And so I think it's a bit of a, you know, climatize them, bring them along. Don't make a sudden drastic change, because it's hard enough already where a lot of in fact, all of their friends that they had won't have anything to do with them. And how do you explain, okay, my 10-year-old understands quite well. 8-year-old, not really. 6 and 3-year-old, you know, why can't we go see so-and-so? How come we can't see why don't we see grandmother anymore? How do you explain that to a child? You can't. It doesn't make sense. All you can say is, well, we can't see him right now. Hopefully sometime we can. And I have that hope that maybe someday we can go back and see them and be friends and return to, you know, the love and feelings we had for each other. However, it's got to be at the point they try to put down conditional love. Well, we will accept you, you're a good person if you do this, this, and this. It's very conditional love and very conditional environment within the FLDS. It needs to be unconditional love. You're an okay person, we like you regardless. Now, we may not agree with this action or the way you dress or whatever it is, but we can still accept you as an individual, we can still associate with you. My identity of who I am or whatever it is isn't going to be compromised by associating with you. But if your identity is given to you from someone else, it's not internalized, it's a very fragile identity. It is at risk of being influenced because it was given to you by someone else. You talk to someone else, and that's why apostates, quote apostates, are so dangerous. They can influence that identity. The person that gave you the identity doesn't want that, and that's why they try to insulate the people from any outside sources. Gentiles somewhat, apostates especially, because you were there at one time, you know what's going on, you now see things differently. Oh, they don't want that because you may be able to influence the way that person sees the world, sees life. Since their identity doesn't come from within, it's given to them, you can also give them an identity and cause them to question the identity they're given. That's dangerous. That's a dangerous thing.
Are you dangerous, considered dangerous?
Yes, I am considered dangerous. And I think that's why they wanted to marginalize me. My understanding, because I've talked to a few individuals who were involved now with the hacking into my email, which is a federal offense, and it's under investigation now. And that was actually within the security of the FLDS, where they keep tabs on the members and what's going on and different things. They made a big deal out of that, saying, look, you start questioning, you start going out, talking to other people, emailing, look at what we can do. It's not that hard for us to find out who you are or what you're doing. And it's the invasion of privacy at a higher level. And so I sit there and look at that and I say, okay, they hacked into my email. That's very invasive. I don't like that. you know, it's, if you're really doing God's will, if you're really inspired, do you have to resort to illegal means to accomplish your ends? No. I mean, if your Doctrine and Covenants, which you say is the Word of God, is valid, you live the laws of God, you don't need to break the laws of the land. Well, you just broke the laws of the land. What's going on here?
They don't care about the laws of the land, really,
Apparently
do
not. Apparently not, but that's not living according to what they say they're living.
they? Yeah.
But I look at that and I say, but where does it stop? Where do they stop? Okay, so they're willing to break the laws to invade my privacy. At what point will they stop breaking laws or invading privacy or taking it to another level? At what point do they say this is enough, or do they? And that's the danger with having an organization with one person at the very top who's in charge, who calls all the shots, and has no oversight. And in so many ways now, I believe that person is becoming Lyle Jeffs. Warren's in prison. For a point there, he had a fair amount of leeway calling in while he was in Texas. But it's impossible for him to know everything that's going on. It's impossible to communicate everything to him. But Lyle can now say, the prophet says thus and so, whether he did or not. And it's just the same as if Warren said it.
So you think things are going to change if Warren Jeffs is found guilty and has to spend the rest of his life in prison? Do you think Lyle will just
I'm
take
sure.
up?
Well, things may change a little bit. I really see that as, right now they're trying to insulate the people even further from that.
How?
If the people really know what Warren is doing and actually start to believe it, and that's the other thing, is if they'll believe it. Because right now, even if they were told a lot of the things that he's done, they're not going to believe it. They'll say, you know, that man could never do those kind of things. I mean, we've been taught, and even lately, right before I was kicked out, the revelations on the proper marriage conduct between man and wife.
What did they tell you?
Well, it's a very, almost a very sterile relationship in so many ways. It's supposed to be devoid of all emotion. There's no lust involved. You're not supposed to physically look at each other. To remain the priesthood garments on for procreation only. You know, it's quite a bit like the Puritan system in a lot of ways, but it's a very restrictive, and if you take it very far, there are some individuals living the higher laws of, quote, Zion, that really had to ask permission before husband and wife came together, which, that's total control of them. But what that does is the people, they go into this and say, well, look, we're living these higher laws. Look how pure our marriage relationships are. This stuff's coming out about Warren. He's our prophet. He's the man of God. He's where this revelation came from. It's damage control is really what they're doing before all this comes out. Because get the people living that, believing that, they'll say, Warren's not even capable of doing it. I know him. He's perfect. He would never do this. And you've heard that. He's
So
a
people think
perfect
he's
man.
perfect?
Yeah, they've got that image of him that's perfect. So anything that doesn't fit into that image, they will ignore it. You're not looking for it. You don't want to look for it. You don't want to see it. You won't see it. It's natural. That's just the way humans are.
So what do you think you need to do? You agreed to do this interview with us. Why did you agree to do that? I mean, that's a pretty stressful thing. It causes anxiety. You don't know what's going to happen in the community if this
I
is
really
seen.
don't. I really don't. I think partly, you know, I'm looking for some way of adding another viewpoint to the people out there. I know this interview is going to have very limited ability to reach any of the membership. They don't read any of the news. They've been asked to shut down all of their internet connections. So it's very limited. The only news of what's happening or anything is given to them from authorized sources within the priesthood. So it's very controlling of anything that they do receive. So no, they won't receive much other than maybe they'll say that I've turned even further darker and, you know, gone to the media and causing more persecution to come upon the people. You know, that's a very real possibility and something I had to consider and say, you know, this may happen. Am I willing to accept that? Well, yes, I am, because I'm here. I feel like what's happening out there, try to shed another angle on it. I really don't think it's a group of people, of pedophiles, and that is one of the, basically a fruit of what's happening, but it's not the root problem. And the root problem is any individual when they allow an individual or an organization to become their identity and don't challenge it. You become dependent upon that. And if that individual or identity has no oversight, you're wide open to be exploited, to be abused, to have anything happen to you. And that's what's happening within the FLDS. It's a lot of good people. They're a lot of good people. Yes, the culture's different. The way they live is different. If it's between consenting adults, I really don't think there's ever going to be an issue. And I've even brought that up. I even brought that up with my father at one time. I said, you know, look, this is when my father's Arnold Richter. He's the one that wrote most of the articles on Truth Will Prevail. As some of those articles he didn't write, they were ones he just proofread. He's an English teacher. But I was discussing with him one day when he was writing those. I said, look, Father, don't you think most of the persecution we're under, we've caused ourselves? And at first he wouldn't agree with that. He said, no, we're being persecuted because we're God's chosen people. I said, well, think about it. Why was Warren Jeffs in hiding? What was he running from? Well, it was from actions he'd taken, actions he could have avoided. I said, these other men who are now in prison after the raid are going to prison. It's actions that they've taken. I said, every time you look at it, almost every action that's really caused this was the marriage of young girls. I said, wouldn't it be so easy to just quit marrying off young and avoid this persecution? I said, it almost feels like Warren intentionally wants the persecution and wanted to go to jail to become, in a sense, a martyr. And he does have tremendous control once in jail. I don't know that he really wanted to go to jail. I don't know, but he ended up there.
If you've got it, watch it. If you don't, call your TV provider to get HDNet today.